Have you ever wondered why the most compassionate people rarely hold positions of absolute power? Why those who rise to the top often seem to have abandoned the very qualities that make us human? There's a dark truth that Machiavelli understood centuries ago. Mercy and power are natural enemies. When one thrives, the other withers. When mercy dies, power is born. The relationship between compassion and authority is not just philosophical. It's practical, brutal, and defines the very fabric of how societies function. Those who cling to mercy find themselves crushed by those who have learned to weaponize its absence. This isn't cynicism, it's reality. And understanding this reality is the first step toward navigating a world where power, not kindness, determines outcomes. Mercy at its core is the willingness to show restraint when you have the ability to cause harm. It's the conscious choice to be gentle when you could be ruthless, to forgive when you could punish, to show weakness when strength would be easier. But here's the paradox that destroys so many well-intentioned people. Mercy requires power to be meaningful, yet the very act of showing mercy diminishes that power. When you choose not to destroy an enemy who has wronged you, you signal to the world that you are either unable or unwilling to use your full strength. In a realm where perception determines reality, this hesitation becomes a fatal flaw. Your enemies see opportunity where you see virtue. Your allies begin to question your resolve. And slowly, imperceptibly, the power you needed to show mercy in the first place begins to slip away. Machiavelli observed this phenomenon in the courts of Renaissance Italy, where princes who ruled with kindness found their kingdoms stolen by those who ruled with iron fists. The merciful ruler becomes a cautionary tale remembered not for their compassion but for their failure. History, after all, is written by those who survive, not those who forgive. But the death of mercy isn't always a sudden execution. More often, it's a slow strangulation, a gradual process where each act of compassion becomes a luxury the ambitious can no longer afford. The first compromise seems small. Perhaps you allow a minor injustice to pass unchallenged because confronting it would cost you political capital. The second compromise is slightly larger. Maybe you remain silent when speaking up would jeopardize your position. Each choice seems rational in isolation, but together they form a pattern of moral erosion. You tell yourself that you're preserving your power for greater good, that the temporary sacrifice of principle will allow you to help more people in the long run. But what you don't realize is that each compromise makes the next one easier, until one day you look in the mirror and realize that mercy has become a foreign concept. This transformation doesn't happen to weak people. It happens to the strongest among us. It takes strength to abandon mercy. Strength to ignore the voice of compassion that once guided your decisions. The weak never had enough power to face this choice in the first place. Only those with real strength must choose between maintaining their humanity and maximizing their influence. Consider the psychology of this transition. Mercy requires you to see your enemies as human beings capable of redemption. Power requires you to see them as obstacles to be removed or tools to be used. Mercy asks you to consider the long-term consequences of your actions on others' well-being. Power demands immediate results regardless of collateral damage. The moment you begin to prioritize outcomes over methods, mercy becomes not just inconvenient, but actively counterproductive. Why waste time and resources on rehabilitation when elimination is more efficient? Why risk betrayal by showing leniency when fear ensures compliance? The cold mathematics of power make mercy seem like an expensive indulgence. But the death of mercy doesn't just transform the individual, it transforms everyone around them. When a leader abandons compassion, they create an environment where mercy becomes a liability for their subordinates as well. The culture shifts to reward ruthlessness and punish hesitation. Those who still cling to their moral compass find themselves unable to compete with colleagues who have abandoned such constraints. This creates a feedback loop where the absence of mercy at the top cascades down through every level of an organization or society. Each person must choose between maintaining their principles and advancing their position. Most choose advancement, rationalizing their decision as necessary for survival in a system they didn't create but cannot change. The irony is that many of these individuals started their journey with genuine desire to help others. They sought power not for its own sake but as a means to implement positive change. They believed that if only they could reach a position of sufficient authority, they would be able to show mercy on a grand scale. But the process of acquiring that authority systematically destroys their capacity for the very compassion they sought to exercise. This is why revolutionary movements so often devour their own idealistic founders. The qualities that inspire people to fight for justice, empathy, moral clarity, unwillingness to compromise, are precisely the qualities that make it impossible to maintain power once it's achieved. The revolution succeeds, but it's no longer led by revolutionaries. It's led by those who learned how to kill mercy without killing their ambition. The transformation from mercy to power isn't always dramatic or obvious. Often it manifests in subtle shifts in language and behavior. The compassionate leader stops talking about helping people and starts talking about achieving objectives. They stop asking how their decisions will affect individuals and start focusing on statistical outcomes. They stop seeing faces and start seeing numbers. This psychological distancing is necessary for the transition because mercy requires connection while power requires separation. You cannot systematically harm people while simultaneously empathizing with their suffering. The mind protects itself by creating emotional barriers that make the exercise of power psychologically sustainable. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of mercy's death is how it convinces itself that it's still alive. The powerful often maintain elaborate justifications for their ruthless actions, framing cruelty as kindness and oppression as protection. They tell themselves that their harsh measures serve a higher purpose, that their willingness to make difficult decisions is itself a form of mercy toward society as a whole. This self-deception isn't weakness, it's sophisticated psychological engineering. Maintaining the illusion of moral purpose while exercising a moral power requires considerable mental effort and creativity. It's easier to be openly evil than to be evil while believing yourself good. But the latter is far more effective because it allows you to inspire loyalty among those who still value virtue. The death of mercy also transforms how power holders view those beneath them. Compassion requires seeing others as equals deserving of consideration. Power requires seeing them as resources to be optimized or obstacles to be overcome. The powerful begin to sort people into categories based not on their inherent worth, but on their utility to the power holder's objective. This utilitarian calculus makes previously unthinkable actions seem reasonable. If person A can advance your goals more effectively than person B, then sacrificing person B to elevate person A becomes a logical choice rather than a moral tragedy. The suffering of individuals becomes acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of larger objectives. But what happens to those who refuse to let mercy die? What becomes of individuals who maintain their compassion even as power beckons? History provides countless examples of their fate. They are crushed, marginalized, or co-opted by those who made the opposite choice. Their principles become their weakness, exploited by more ruthless competitors who understand that virtue is a luxury the truly powerful cannot afford. Yet some manage to resist this transformation, maintaining islands of mercy in oceans of power. These rare individuals develop sophisticated strategies for protecting their compassion while still exercising authority. They learn to compartmentalize, showing mercy when they can afford to while being ruthless when necessity demands it. They master the art of appearing more heartless than they are while secretly preserving their humanity. But even these exceptional cases pay a price. The constant tension between their inner nature and their external role creates psychological strain that few can sustain indefinitely. They become isolated, unable to trust others with knowledge of their true character, forever walking a tightrope between effectiveness and authenticity. The most successful among them learn to delegate their cruelty, maintaining clean hands while others carry out necessary but distasteful tasks. They preserve their own capacity for mercy by ensuring they never have to exercise its opposite directly. But this strategy has its own moral implications. Is there a meaningful difference between committing acts of ruthlessness and ordering others to commit them on your behalf? This delegation of cruelty creates hierarchies of moral compromise where each level insulates those above from the full weight of their decisions. The king orders the general who commands the captain who instructs the soldier who pulls the trigger. Each person in the chain can tell themselves they're just following orders or serving a higher purpose. But the cumulative effect is the systematic elimination of mercy from the decision-making process. The death of mercy also changes how power holders relate to abstract concepts like justice and fairness. Mercy personalizes these concepts, requiring consideration of individual circumstances and unique suffering. Power abstracts them, reducing complex human situations to simple formulas and precedents. Justice becomes about consistency rather than compassion. Fairness becomes about equal treatment rather than equitable outcome. This shift toward abstraction makes the exercise of power more efficient but less human. Decisions can be made quickly without getting bogged down in emotional considerations or special circumstances. Rules are applied uniformly without regard for their differential impact on different individuals. The system becomes more predictable, but less responsive to genuine human need. But perhaps most tragically, the death of mercy transforms how power holders understand success. Compassionate individuals measure success by the well-being of those they serve, the reduction of suffering they achieve, and the positive changes they create in individual lives. Powerful individuals measure success by their ability to maintain and expand their authority, their capacity to implement their will, and their position relative to other power holders. This shift in metrics creates a feedback loop where the pursuit of power becomes self-reinforcing. Each successful exercise of authority validates the choice to abandon mercy, while each act of compassion that costs power is seen as a failure to be avoided in the future. The power holder becomes addicted to the very thing that required them to sacrifice their humanity. The death of mercy isn't just an individual tragedy, it's a societal transformation that changes the nature of human relationships themselves. When those in authority abandon compassion, it signals to everyone else that mercy is weakness and ruthlessness is strength. This message cascades through every level of society, from corporate boardrooms to school playgrounds, creating a culture where kindness is seen as naivety and cruelty is seen as sophistication. Children growing up in such environments learn early that the world rewards those who are willing to step on others to get ahead. They observe that the nice finish last while the ruthless finish first. This socialization creates successive generations that are increasingly comfortable with the absence of mercy, further accelerating the transformation from compassionate societies to power-focused ones. But even in societies where mercy has largely died, its ghost continues to haunt the powerful. They must constantly justify their actions, not just to others but to themselves. They create elaborate philosophies and ideologies that frame their ruthlessness as necessary virtue. They surround themselves with advisors who reinforce their worldview and eliminate dissenting voices that might reawaken their dormant conscience. This psychological architecture requires constant maintenance, because the human capacity for empathy doesn't disappear, it just gets. Late at night in moments of quiet reflection, even the most hardened power holder sometimes remembers what it felt like to care about individual suffering. These moments of vulnerability must be quickly suppressed or rationalized away because acknowledging them would undermine the entire structure of power they've built. The most sophisticated power holders learn to weaponize the memory of mercy, using their past compassion as evidence of their moral authority, while simultaneously exercising power without constraint. They tell stories about their earlier idealism to demonstrate their fundamentally good nature while making decisions that would horrify their younger self. This allows them to maintain public support from those who still value compassion while never allowing that compassion to interfere with their exercise of power. But what does this transformation mean for society as a whole? When mercy dies in positions of authority, it creates ripple effects that touch every aspect of human interaction. Laws become harsher, institutions become more rigid, and human suffering becomes more acceptable as long as it serves larger objectives. The social safety net weakens because helping the vulnerable is seen as inefficient allocation of resources. Innovation suffers because mercy allows for failure and learning, while power demands immediate results. Creativity diminishes because compassion encourages exploration while authority requires conformity. Human potential is wasted because mercy sees possibilities where power sees only current utility. The death of mercy also changes how societies handle conflict and disagreement. Compassionate approaches to dispute resolution, mediation, reconciliation, restorative justice, are abandoned in favor of more efficient but less healing methods. Winners and losers are determined quickly, but the underlying issues that created the conflict remain unaddressed, ensuring future problems. International relations become particularly brutal when mercy dies in positions of global power. Diplomacy gives way to coercion, cooperation is replaced by domination, and the welfare of foreign populations becomes irrelevant except as it affects domestic political calculation. Wars become easier to start and harder to end because peace requires the kind of empathy that power has systematically eliminated. Yet perhaps the most profound impact of Mercy's death is on the concept of human dignity itself. Compassion is based on the recognition that every person has inherent worth regardless of their utility or productivity. Power evaluates people based on their contribution to the power holder's objectives. When power dominates, human dignity becomes conditional rather than inherent. This transformation affects not just how the powerful treat others, but how everyone learns to value themselves and each other. People begin to see their own worth in terms of their productivity and usefulness, rather than their fundamental humanity. Self-worth becomes tied to achievement rather than existence, creating psychological pressure that drives many to abandon their own capacity for mercy in pursuit of measurable success. The death of Mercy also transforms how societies understand and practice loyalty. Compassionate loyalty is based on mutual care and shared values. You remain loyal because you genuinely care about the other person's well-being. Power-based loyalty is transactional. You remain loyal as long as it serves your interests or until a better opportunity arises. This shift creates unstable alliances and relationships where everyone is constantly calculating the costs and benefits of their commitments. Trust becomes impossible because everyone understands that loyalty is conditional and temporary. The social bonds that hold communities together weaken because they're no longer based on genuine concern for others' welfare. But perhaps most insidiously, the death of Mercy changes how power holders understand truth itself. Compassion requires honesty because you cannot genuinely help someone based on false information about their situation. Power requires only useful information. Truth becomes relevant only insofar as it advances your objective. This instrumental relationship with truth creates environments where facts are manipulated, narratives are crafted, and reality is shaped to serve power rather than illuminate understanding. Information becomes a weapon rather than a tool for making better decisions. The very concept of objective truth becomes secondary to the question of whose interests that truth serves. The psychological toll of maintaining power without mercy is enormous, though it's rarely acknowledged by those who pay it. The constant vigilance required to maintain authority, the isolation that comes from trusting no one completely, and the cognitive dissonance of justifying cruel actions all create stress that manifests in various ways. Some power holders become paranoid, seeing threats everywhere, because they know they would be threats in others' positions. Others become increasingly detached from reality, surrounding themselves with yes-men who tell them what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. Still others become addicted to the exercise of power itself, requiring ever greater demonstrations of their authority to feel secure. But the most tragic aspect of Mercy's death may be how it prevents the powerful from experiencing the very satisfactions they originally sought. Those who pursued power to help others find that they can no longer take pleasure in others' well-being because they've trained themselves to see people as resources, rather than individuals worthy of care. The joy that comes from genuine human connection becomes impossible because every relationship is evaluated in terms of its utility. The sense of purpose that originally motivated their pursuit of power disappears because they can no longer remember why they thought power was worth having in the first place. Yet even in this bleak landscape, Mercy's death is not inevitable or irreversible. History provides examples of individuals who found ways to maintain their compassion while exercising significant authority. These exceptional cases offer lessons about how mercy might survive in environments hostile to its existence. The key seems to be maintaining connection to the human consequences of power, while insulating oneself from the corrupting influences that typically accompany authority. This requires tremendous discipline, and often involves accepting less power than one could theoretically wield in order to preserve the humanity that makes power worth having. Some achieve this by limiting their terms of service, deliberately stepping away from power before it can completely transform them. Others maintain this balance by surrounding themselves with advisors who are explicitly charged with reminding them of mercy's importance, even when it conflicts with immediate objective. Still others preserve their compassion by maintaining regular contact with those most affected by their decisions, ensuring they cannot abstract away the human cost of their choices. They make themselves see the faces behind the statistics, hear the stories behind the data, and feel the weight of individual suffering their decisions cause. But perhaps the most important lesson from those who successfully resist mercy's death is that it requires acknowledging the fundamental tension between compassion and power rather than pretending it doesn't exist. Only by honestly confronting the ways that authority corrupts can one hope to maintain the very qualities that made them worthy of authority in the first place. This honest acknowledgement
also requires accepting that there will be costs to maintaining mercy, opportunities missed, efficiency sacrificed, and objectives delayed. Those who insist on preserving their compassion must be willing to accept these costs as the price of remaining human in human systems. The death of mercy and the birth of power represents one of humanity's most fundamental challenges. It explains why our most idealistic leaders so often disappoint us, why our institutions become rigid and cruel over time, and why successive generations seem to become more callous than their predecessors. But understanding this dynamic also offers hope. By recognizing how power kills mercy, we can perhaps find ways to structure authority that resist this transformation. By acknowledging the tension between compassion and control, we might develop systems that preserve human dignity while still maintaining necessary order. The question isn't whether mercy will always die when power is born. The question is whether we're willing to pay the price to keep it alive. That price includes accepting less efficiency, tolerating more chaos, and acknowledging that the most human leaders may not always be the most effective ones by conventional measures. Perhaps most importantly, it requires us to redefine what we mean by effectiveness. If power without mercy creates societies that function efficiently but destroy human souls, then maybe we need to value leaders who are less effective at wielding power but more effective at preserving the qualities that make power worth having in the first place. When mercy dies, power is indeed born, but mercy's death is not inevitable. It's a choice, made one decision at a time, one compromise at a time, one rationalization at a time, and if it's a choice, then it can be chosen different. The question is whether we have the courage to make that choice, knowing full well the costs it will entail. The future of human civilization may well depend on our ability to find leaders who refuse to let mercy die, even when power beckons. For in the end, power without mercy is not strength. It's the absence of everything that makes strength worth having.